The Sci-Fi fleet arrived in the Sol system like a storm blotting out the stars. Massive, wedge-shaped warships cast long shadows over the planets, their hulls humming with restrained power. The lead dreadnought, Judgment of HFY, moved with the arrogance of an empire that had never known defeat. At its helm, King HFY himself observed the blue and green orb of Earth, his mandibles clicking in amusement. "They cower," he said, voice a guttural growl. As expected, from a secure station orbiting Mars, Admiral Elias Rains of the United Terran Federation watched the incoming fleet with an unreadable expression. The man was carved from war, his face a roadmap of old battles, his steel-gray eyes locked onto the enemy formation. He had studied the Sci-Fi, dissected their conquests, understood their hubris, the arrogance of predators who had never met a species willing to bite back. "They don't think we'll fight," Rains murmured. "They think we'll kneel." Beside him, Director Helen Vargas of Earth's diplomatic corps shifted uncomfortably. "Our intelligence suggests they have never once entertained peace negotiations. Every species they've encountered has either submitted or been exterminated." A pulse of static interrupted them. The Sci-Fi were making contact. The main view screen flickered, and King HFY appeared. He was enormous, even for his kind, 8 feet of hardened carapace and muscle, his many eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a predator. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship was lined with subservient officers, each standing rigid, their hands clasped behind their backs in disciplined silence. "Humans," HFY rumbled, his voice deep and guttural, translated by artificial means. "Your species is young, reckless, ignorant of the true order of the stars. I will offer you the same courtesy I have extended to others before you. Kneel before the might of the Sci-Fi Dominion. Submit, and you may yet serve with purpose. Refuse, and your worlds will burn." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving silence in its wake. Vargas exhaled slowly. "He doesn't even pretend to negotiate." Rain smirked. "Why would he? He's never lost." President Adrian Locke's voice cut through the room, the leader of Earth addressing them from the secure chamber deep beneath Geneva. "We knew this was coming. The question is, do we yield or do we fight?" No one in the room spoke. The answer was already written in their expressions, in the tension coiling through the air. Rains leaned forward. "With respect, sir, the Sci-Fi don't understand diplomacy. They understand strength. If we kneel, we will never stand again." Locke nodded, as if he had already come to the same conclusion. "Then we fight." Orders moved like wildfire. Defense grids warmed to life, fleets mobilized, and covert teams set into motion. Across every military outpost, every shipyard, every command center, the message was clear. Humanity would not go quietly. On the Sci-Fi flagship, HFY watched the human response with growing amusement. The Federation's fleet was repositioning, but there was no sign of immediate surrender. "Foolish." He turned to his second-in-command, General Varkle. "They hesitate," HFY said. "They think themselves capable of resistance." Varkle hesitated before replying. "The humans have survived countless internal wars, my king. They are no strangers to conflict." HFY's mandibles twitched in irritation. "Wars between their own kind, perhaps. But they have never faced a force such as ours. Dispatch a warning strike. Show them the cost of defiance." The order was carried out within the hour. A squadron of Sci-Fi warships broke formation, launching toward a human colony on Europa. It was a calculated message, one designed to instill fear, to remind humanity of their place. Rain saw it coming. Before the Sci-Fi could fire their first shot, space itself seemed to twist. The Terran fleet had been waiting, concealed behind Europa's shadow. Plasma lances and railgun slugs tore through the Sci-Fi advanced ships before they even had time to react. The battle was brief, brutal, and one-sided. As the wreckage drifted, Rains watched from the command deck, his face impassive. "Message received, Your Highness." The Sci-Fi had threatened annihilation. Humanity's response was simple. Let them try. The first true battle of the war lasted 7 minutes. 7 minutes for the Sci-Fi to realize humanity was not prey. 7 minutes for the galaxy to witness what happened when an apex predator mistook another for weak. King HFY stood motionless on the bridge of judgment of HFY, his eyes locked onto the tactical display. His warships, once an overwhelming wall of destruction, now drifted in pieces. The humans had not met them head-on like the others. No, they had waited, hidden in the dark, using Europa's icy moon as cover. Then, like ghosts, they had struck. Cunning, unexpected, unacceptable. He turned slowly to General Varkle, his voice dangerously calm. How many? Varkle hesitated, mandibles twitching. 17 ships lost, my king. No confirmed human casualties. Silence settled over the bridge like a shroud. The crew, veterans of 100 conquests, stood rigid, their pride wounded. HFY, let the moment fester. Let them feel the sting of their own arrogance. They knew we were coming. He spoke the words slowly, deliberately. They prepared. A lesser species should not have been capable of such deception. The Sci-Fi had studied humanity, learned their history. War was in their blood, but never like this. This was not reckless defiance. This was patience. Strategy. It would not happen again. Burn one of their worlds, HFY ordered. Let them understand their place. The order was relayed, and across the fleet, weapons primed for devastation. If humanity wished to fight, they would learn the cost of defying the Sci-Fi dominion. But they had underestimated humanity once before. They would do so again. In the war room beneath Geneva, Admiral Elias Rains leaned over the holodeck, eyes scanning the unfolding chaos. The Sci-Fi fleet had redirected toward Proxima Centauri, a colony of 80,000 civilians. He could already see their strategy: overwhelm, annihilate, demoralize. They're trying to break us before we can mount a real defense, Director Helen Vargas murmured beside him. Make us afraid. Rains exhaled through his nose. They should have picked a different species. He opened a secure channel. Task Force Orion, you are clear to engage. Across the void, in the depths of interstellar space, humanity's response had already begun. The Sci-Fi fleet arrived at Proxima Centauri to find the skies empty. No Terran warships, no defense platforms, no orbital resistance. It was almost insulting. They had expected at least a token effort, perhaps a desperate last stand. Instead, they found a silent planet, the city lights below shining like stars against the surface. The bombardment began without hesitation. Then everything went wrong. As the first wave of plasma fire descended, it vanished. The weapons impacted nothing but an empty projection. The colony had been evacuated days prior. The humans had left the lights on, broadcasting a false image, and they had left something else. Before the Sci-Fi could recover from their confusion, space itself erupted. Human warships materialized from subspace in a perfect formation, their weapons already locked onto the enemy fleet. But it wasn't just a direct assault. No! The humans had learned from their first engagement. They didn't fight the Sci-Fi's way. They fought their own way. Electronic warfare systems hijacked Sci-Fi targeting computers, feeding them falsified data. Warships turned on phantom threats while the real enemy weaved between them. Orbital drones, remotely controlled from hidden relay stations, slipped into the Sci-Fi formation and detonated in coordinated strikes. Humanity didn't fight for honor. Humanity fought to win. On the bridge of the UTF flagship Dauntless, Captain Lillian Hayes watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. She had spent years studying the Sci-Fi, reading their tactics, dissecting their history. She had seen the patterns, the arrogance, the predictable reliance on brute force. Now, she was watching them drown in their own overconfidence. The Sci-Fi fleet never recovered. Within 20 minutes, half their ships were dead in the water. The rest scattered, some fleeing into deep space, others falling to human pursuit craft. What had begun as a massacre had turned into a rout. On judgment of XY Cal, the silence had returned, the kind that carried weight. XY Cal did not move, did not speak. His generals watched him carefully, waiting. The humans had humiliated them once. Now they had done it again. No species had ever done this to them. He clenched his mandibles, summoned the full fleet. Every warship, every soldier. We will remind these creatures what it means to defy the Sci-Fi. Varkle hesitated. And if they are prepared for that, my king? XY Cal turned, his voice a quiet growl. Then we will burn their entire species to ash. The war was no longer a conquest. It was something far worse. It was personal. The invasion of Sci-Fi Prime began under a sky choked with fire. The once proud capital of the Sci-Fi Dominion, a city of towering black spires and sprawling war factories, now lay beneath the shadow of Earth's fleet. The battle above had already been decided. Sci-Fi warships, once the terror of the galaxy, drifted in ruin, their wreckage forming a new ring around their dying world. The human assault had been swift, relentless, methodical. Now, the ground war would finish what had begun among the stars. Admiral Elias Rain stood in the open bay of a descending dropship, clad in black combat armor, the weight of war pressing into his shoulders. The air inside the transport was thick with tension, the rhythmic hum of engines drowned out by the distant thunder of orbital bombardments. Around him, human soldiers checked their weapons, their expressions grim. They all knew what awaited them below. The Sci-Fi would not surrender. The ship rocked as it broke through the atmosphere, turbulence sending a tremor through the steel beneath Rain's boots. The comms were alive with chatter. Ground teams reporting resistance, air support calling for targets. He listened in silence, gaze fixed on the burning horizon. The war was ending. Humanity would ensure it ended on their terms. The dropship landed in the heart of the enemy capital, its doors hissing open to a city in chaos. Fire raged in the streets, black smoke curling into the sky. Dead Sci-Fi soldiers lay where they had fallen, their weapons clutched in lifeless hands. Survivors still fought, their once mighty legions reduced to desperate defenders clinging to the last remnants of their empire. Rain stepped out onto the war-torn streets, rifle in hand. His boots crushed shattered stone and broken bodies as he advanced, his soldiers moving like shadows beside him. The Sci-Fi, still loyal to their king, fought with the ferocity of the damned, but it no longer mattered. They were outmaneuvered, outgunned, outmatched. He keyed his calm Vargas status. Helen Vargas' voice crackled through the channel, her tone cold. Resistance is collapsing. We're pushing toward the palace. No sign of XY Cal yet. The king was still hiding. Rains knew how this would end, even if the Sci-Fi did not. The Dominion had ruled with fear, had crushed civilizations beneath its heel. Now, the galaxy watched as its great empire bled out in the streets of its own capital. The humans had made sure of that. Every world that had once trembled before the Sci-Fi now saw their so-called conquerors fall like any other. Every enslaved species, every broken people, had witnessed the moment their oppressors became the hunted. And it wasn't over yet. The palace loomed ahead, its dark walls pitted and scorched from orbital fire. Once, it had stood as the heart of a vast empire. Now, it was a tomb. Rains moved through the halls without hesitation, his soldiers securing the last defenses. Bodies littered the marble floors. The scent of death thick in the air. The last of the palace guards had fought to the end, but it had not been enough. It had never been enough. At the throne room doors, he found Vargas waiting, her own rifle slung over her shoulder. She met his gaze, a knowing look passing between them. They had come for the king. The doors were forced open, revealing the shattered remains of Sci-Fi rule. The grand chamber was in ruins. Columns broken, banners torn, the air filled with the acrid stench of burning metal. And at the center, standing before his ruined throne, was King XY Cal. He did not kneel. Even now, with his empire in flames, his people slaughtered, his armies crushed, The king of the Sci-Fi stood defiant. His massive frame cast a long shadow in the dim light, his many eyes burning with hatred. "You believe this is victory," HFY growled, his voice raw, his mandibles twitching. "You are fools." Rain stepped forward, his rifle aimed squarely at the king's chest. "Your empire is gone." HFY bared his fangs. "Empires rise and fall. Yours will be no different." Vargas scoffed. "The difference, your highness, is that we remember our enemies." She nodded, and the soldiers advanced. HFY fought. He fought as a warrior born, his claws tearing through the first man who tried to restrain him. He roared, a sound filled with the fury of a dying beast, his massive frame lashing out in one final act of defiance. But it was already over. A shot rang out. The king staggered. Another, then another. His body jerked under the impact, yet he refused to fall. Blood dripped from his wounds, pooling at his feet, but he remained standing, until Rain stepped forward and pressed the barrel of his rifle beneath the king's jaw. "You lost," he said, and then he pulled the trigger. The king of the Sci-Fi crumpled to the ground. Outside the palace, the last of the Sci-Fi resistance shattered. The sight of their fallen ruler, dragged through the streets for all to see, broke what little will remained. Some tried to fight. Others ran. It no longer mattered. By nightfall, the war was over. Humanity had won. The ashes of the Sci-Fi dominion cooled beneath the twin suns of their ruined homeworld. The great spires of their once proud cities lay in heaps of blackened stone and twisted metal, their banners trampled into the dust by human boots. The war was over. The last cries of defiance had faded into silence, leaving only the dead and the victors to bear witness to the end of an empire that had ruled through terror for centuries. Admiral Elias Rain stood on the balcony of the former Sci-Fi palace, gazing down at the city below. Fires still burned in the distance, their embers drifting through the air like fallen stars. The streets, once filled with the marching legions of the Dominion, now belonged to the soldiers of Earth. Humanity had done what no other species had dared. They had not just defeated the Sci-Fi, they had erased them from the galactic throne. He exhaled slowly. It should have felt like victory. Behind him, Helen Vargas approached, her footsteps careful on the cracked marble floor. "It's over," she said, though there was no triumph in her voice. Only certainty. Reins didn't turn. For us, maybe. The rest of the galaxy had watched this war unfold, uncertain of what would come next. Many had secretly hoped for humanity's victory, but now that it was here, fear clung to the edges of their gratitude. The Sci-Fi had ruled with brutality, but they had also brought a kind of order, an iron grip that kept the balance of power from shifting too wildly. Now, that grip was gone, shattered beneath human fists. And the question remained, what would humanity do with the power left in the aftermath? Vargas leaned against the railing, her gaze scanning the occupied city. The Senate is calling it the dawn of a new era. Rains let out a dry chuckle. They would. The bureaucrats and politicians had already begun carving up the remains of the Dominion. Treaties were being drafted, borders redrawn. The surviving species of the Sci-Fi's conquest were rising from the wreckage, reclaiming what was once theirs. Some had cheered humanity as liberators. Others watched with wary eyes, wondering if their new masters would be any different from the last. Vargas crossed her arms. "They're afraid of us." "They should be," Rain said without hesitation. She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "What happens now?" That was the question, wasn't it? What happens to the victor after the war is won? Humanity had proven its strength, had torn down the greatest power the galaxy had ever known. But what came next? Would they build something better? Or had they simply claimed the throne for themselves? Rains finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Now, we decide what kind of future we want." In the streets below, human soldiers patrolled alongside newly freed species, some exchanging wary glances, others speaking in cautious whispers. Humanity had shattered the old order, but it was not their place to dictate what rose in its place. The war was over. The real test had just begun.